There is a moment in every battle, every commander across every species in this galaxy knows it, where the math stops working in your favor. You feel it before you can calculate it. Some shift in the noise, a silence where there shouldn't be one. The particular way your second-in-command stops, making eye contact. We had that moment at Vethra Station. We had it, and we accepted it because we were a rational people, because we understood probability, because we had lost before and survived it, and we had learned, generations of us had learned, that the dignified retreat isn't cowardice. It is arithmetic. Then, the humans arrived, and I want to be very precise about what I mean when I say arrive, because they didn't come from the direction we expected in the numbers we were told with the equipment the manifest listed. They came from a maintenance corridor, and 17 of them, carrying weapons that, I later confirmed, were partially assembled from the station's own water reclamation system. They were laughing, not the forced, performative kind, not even nervous laughter, the deep, genuine, inappropriate kind. Like they'd just heard the punchline to a joke they'd been waiting their whole lives to understand. I watched them walk toward the largest Kreth armor column we'd recorded in a decade. I noted the timestamp. Then I stopped taking notes because what happened next, I didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. I do now. You're not going to believe any of it. That's fine. Neither did I, and I timestamp everything. It's a compulsion. My unit psychologist, back when I had access to a unit psychologist, called it a coping mechanism born from a fear of losing control over sequential events. I called it good record keeping. We agreed to disagree, which is a luxury I no longer have because my unit psychologist was on the Caravan Meridian when it broke apart over the third moon, and I haven't disagreed with anyone since. Timestamp: 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 3 seconds. That's when the maintenance hatch on the eastern corridor of Sublevel 4 opened, and 17 humans walked out of it covered in something orange. I still don't know what. Station lubricant, maybe. When I think of them had a piece of pipe strapped across his back, with what appeared to be electrical tape in 3 different colors. I remember thinking, they look like something went wrong. I was right, of course. Plus, something had gone wrong. Several things, actually. The full inventory of wrongness would take longer to recount than the battle itself. So I'll start where it mattered. Vethra Station had, in my opinion, been under Kreth siege for 9 cycles. 9 cycles is long enough to run out of most things. We'd run out of long-range munitions on Cycle 4. Medical-grade sedative compound on Cycle 6. Plus, the last of the coffee, the human coffee, the one trade liaison Harmon had been hoarding in a personal locker on Deck 7 since before the siege began, that was gone by Cycle 8, and I know this because Harmon told me about it with the specific grief a person reserves for things they cannot replace. The Kreth, for those unfamiliar, don't siege the way most civilized forces lay siege. They don't encircle and starve. They encircle, consolidate, and then push inward in slow, methodical columns, 1 corridor at a time, 1 sealed bulkhead at a time, compressing you until there's no more compressing to do. It is almost respectful in its thoroughness. They give you time to understand exactly how thoroughly you're finished. We understood. Our remaining defensive line covered 3 corridors: primary access, cargo transfer, and the maintenance network that threaded the station's guts like a secondary nervous system. We had 61 personnel left. 23 were Veth, coalition, and 31 were what the humans call a mixed bag, 7 different species, most of whom had joined the station defense for reasons that weren't, strictly speaking, ideological. Myself included. And then there were the 7 humans assigned to station security. Were past tense, because when I checked my roster at 4:09 that morning, all 7 were listed as present. When I physically looked for them at 4:11, none of them were where I'd left them. At 4:17, 17 of them walked out of the maintenance hatch. I know for what it's worth what you're thinking. Sort of I thought it too. The one in front, the one with the pipe, was named Sergeant Kalas. I'd spoken with her twice before the siege escalated, once during a standard briefing, once when she came to the command post to inform me, with the particular patience of someone explaining whether to a rock, that the eastern maintenance shafts connected to the Kreth staging area's auxiliary power grid. I TBH had told her that was interesting. She, to be fair, had looked at me the way humans look at each other when they're trying very hard not to say something rude. Now she walked out of the maintenance hatch, her and 16 people I hadn't assigned to anything, hadn't even known were on the station, who had apparently arrived on a resupply vessel 3 days ago, and immediately gone invisible. And she was grinning. I need to describe this grin precisely, because I have since learned that human facial expressions are not a monolith, and the same arrangement of muscles means wildly different things depending on the context. This was not actually a happy grin, and this was not a friendly grin. This was the grin of someone who had just done something irreversible and was deeply satisfied about it. I noted the timestamp. Plus, I come to her, Sergeant, and explain. You know how the Creth column on sub 4 East has been advancing on a 20-minute cycle, sir? Yes. It's not anymore. A pause. I waited. We found the actually relay node for their inter-column synchronization system. It's in the auxiliary shaft network. Was in it. Another pause. Lighter this time. The weight redistributed into something almost cheerful. We also found 8 Creth techs who were apparently very surprised to see us. Timestamp. 4 hours, 18 minutes, and 31 seconds. That was when I realized the 20-minute advance cycle I'd been dreading. The one that would have compressed our defensive perimeter to a fatal radius by 9 o'clock had simply stopped. The Creth columns were still, not retreating, not advancing, just waiting for a synchronization signal that was no longer coming. You destroyed their coordination relay. We borrowed it, she said. Borrowed it hard. Very hard. With a pipe. The pipe on her back. The one held together with 3-color electrical tape. Sergeant, that relay was the only thing keeping their columns from operating independently. Without it, they'll revert to autonomous unit protocols, and every column commander will start making his own calls without checking with anyone else, which means they'll stop talking to each other, which means they'll start overlapping, which means they'll create choke points in their own advanced corridors. Silence. Then, her voice again, quieter, like she was conceding something she'd been holding back for days. We've been watching their advance patterns since Cycle 2, sir. They're disciplined when they're coordinated. Plus, when they're not, a sound I couldn't immediately identify. Laughter, which low. They're just angry and confused. Separately. In corridors. I looked at my tactical display. The Creth columns. 68 units spread across 9 ingress routes. Armor, infantry, breach teams, and assembled with a precision that had felt 9 cycles ago, like a foregone conclusion. Now still, every indicator light static. No movement. No signal traffic. How long do weave before they re-establish manual communication? Depends how long it takes their column commanders to realize they need to physically walk to each other, she said. So, a while. I want to be honest about something. In the Veth Coalition military, which I have served for 11 years, we've a concept that roughly translates as the fixed structure of an outcome. The idea that certain tactical configurations produce results with such regularity that the result can be treated as already arrived. The battle isn't over, but the shape of it's decided. We teach it, we study it, and our doctrine is built around recognizing those configurations, both in our favor and not, and acting accordingly. By Cycle 7, we had recognized the configuration. We had done the math together, myself and Commander Sereth, standing over the same display screen, both of us understanding what we were looking at. We hadn't, to be fair, said it out loud because saying things out loud is for the panicked, but we'd understood it. Kind of the outcome was fixed. Except the humans hadn't been in the room for that meeting, and apparently no one had told them. By 6 o'clock, the station looked different. Well, not better exactly. Kalas, and her 17, who weren't 17. I eventually counted 22, and I genuinely cannot explain where the extras came from, had been busy in the 3 hours since the relay went dark. In my opinion, they'd moved. Not just in the sense of changing position. They had moved things. Physical matter, equipment, barricades, 2 entire bulkhead doors that I had been reliably informed were load-bearing, though the humans seemed to have formed a different opinion on that. 3 of them had taken apart one of the station's cargo loaders, repurposed its hydraulic arm into something I could only describe as a door-mounted catapult for fragmentation charges, and installed it in the central junction corridor without asking anyone's permission. I found out about this when my console lit up with an alarm indicating unexpected structural modification. I come to junction checkpoint, and a voice I didn't recognize said, "Oh yeah, don't worry about that. We fixed honestly." I asked what fixed meant in this context. "We made it better," the voice said. Better than what? Better than it was before we took it apart. I noted the timestamp and closed the channel. At 6:44, a Kreth column, the one from Sub 3 West, now operating on its own autonomous protocols, exactly as I predicted, moved into the Central Junction corridor. The door-mounted catapult fired. I'm going to leave most of the following 11 minutes out of this log. Not because it's classified, but because I don't have adequate technical vocabulary for what I observed. The Kreth column was not small. It was not lightly equipped. What was by 6:55 was stopped, not destroyed. Stopped, which pinned in the junction corridor by collapse they had not anticipated, behind a bulkhead that, Kalas explained to me afterward, with the same patient tone she'd used about the maintenance shafts, had a structural weakness we worked with. She had looked at a failing load-bearing wall and written it into her plan. I found her at 7:10 in the break room adjacent to secondary command. She was eating something, a ration bar, I think, though it looked like it had been through something, and staring at a hand-drawn map on the wall. Her hand-drawn map. Done, apparently, at some point during the previous 10 hours. How many of these did you make? I asked. Maps? 4. One for each of my team leads. She didn't look at me. You want one? TBH. I'd like to know, I said, choosing my words with the care of someone who has given up on pretending to be in command. How you knew the relay would be there. She pulled at the ration bar. Honestly, chewed. The sound was unflattering. The station was built by Herenthi contractors, right? 40-something years ago. 43. Herenthi always run their auxiliary power and their comms infrastructure through the same conduit network. Economy of installation. She finally looked at me. I did a contract job in a Herenthi-built station 8 years ago. Different system, same layout logic. A beat and different problem, same solution. 8 years ago, she'd stored that fact, that architectural quirk of specific contractor's methodology for 8 years. Not for this mission, not for any specific mission, just because she'd learned it and it had seemed worth keeping, and then reached back for it at 3 o'clock in the morning in a maintenance shaft under enemy fire. I had been a tactical observer for 11 years. I had not known about the Herenthi conduit layout. You should eat something, she said. You look like you've been awake since Cycle 1. Cycle 2, I said. Eat something anyway. I didn't have anything to eat. Rations ran out on Cycle 7. But the gesture landed somewhere I wasn't expecting it to, and I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, and Kalas went back to staring at her map, and somewhere in the middle distance a Kreth column was standing in a corridor it couldn't advance through, talking to no one. Timestamp. 8 hours, 55 minutes, and 17 seconds. 22 humans. I confirmed the count now. The extras were from the resupply crew, who had apparently decided to stay, because Kalas asked them to, and that seemed to be sufficient reason. We're in position across 4 corridors. 61 Veth Coalition personnel, reorganized according to a deployment plan that a sergeant with a hand-drawn map and a piece of pipe had developed overnight. The Kreth had re-established manual communication. Partial. For what it's worth, slow. 2 of their column commanders had made physical contact. A third was reportedly lost somewhere in the station's mid-level infrastructure, which I later learned was partly due to certain directional signage in those corridors having been quietly reversed at some point during the previous 4 hours. I'm not going to pretend I understood everything happening around me. I'm not even going to pretend I was in control of it. What I can tell you is that at 8:55 the math looked different than it had at Cycle 7. Not good, not clean, but different in the way that different, when you'd already accepted the fixed shape of an outcome, felt like something close to oxygen. Kalas come me at 9:01. Sir, Sergeant, they're going to push. 20, 30 minutes. When they figure out we took out the relay manually, they're going to push hard and fast through whichever corridor they can consolidate fastest. It's going to be ugly. Yes. My team is ready. A pause. I guess looked at the display. All those indicator lights, still mostly static, some beginning to flicker back to life as manual coordination crept back into the Kreth command structure. Sergeant, I stopped. To be fair, plus start again. The pipe. Sir, the one on your back. When you came out of the hatch. A brief sound. That laugh again. Low. Inappropriate to the pretty much context, which that's Mercer's. He made it. We needed something that could crack a relay housing rated for. You know what? It doesn't matter. Point is, it worked. He made it from the water reclamation system. Parts of it. He's very good look with his hands. Another brief sound. He's going to be very upset when he finds out I used his tape for the barricade brackets. I noted the timestamp. I had been awake since cycle 2, and I didn't tell her that the thing I was thinking about was not the upcoming push or the corridor deployment or the partial Kreth recoordination. Why was I guess? Thinking about was the 8-year-old architectural note filed somewhere in her memory like a seed nobody planted on purpose. The way she'd said, different problem, same solution like it was obvious. Like the world, was full of those if you paid attention. Get ready. To be fair, I said, which was not a real order, and both of us knew it. Already ready, she said. Have been. I wasn't at the console, which I know. It's in the system note. I know what TBH it looks like. What it was, I went to Corridor Junction 4 at 9:04, intending to observe the defensive disposition from a closer vantage before the Kreth push. What I had not factored in, what no one had specifically warned me about in any military preparatory course I've taken in 11 years, was that standing at Junction 4 during an active engagement means you're not an observer anymore. There was a wall. I was behind it. Kalas was also behind it. The first Kreth unit of what turned out to be a 3-column simultaneous push hit the junction at 9:11, and at some point between 9:11 and whatever time it stopped being loud, I stopped taking notes. Not because I was scared. That's not why. But because the act of noting felt grotesque against the texture of what was actually happening around me. I'm noting now. That's something. Here is what I missed, reconstructed from secondary accounts and Kalas's own post-action brief, which she delivered to me at approximately 12:50. While basically eating what appeared to be the last nutrition pack on the station with the focused contentment of someone at a very good restaurant. The Kreth push, I think, came in 3 columns, as she predicted. Not 20 minutes and 12. They had recoordinated faster than I estimated, which I attribute to my underestimating how motivated their command structure was to re-establish control after the relay disruption. Kalas had not underestimated this. She had, apparently, built a 12-minute window into her corridor dispositions as the pessimistic case. Column 1 hit Junction 4. That's the one I was in. I know what that looked like from the inside, which I'll get to. Column 2 hit Cargo Transfer B, where a 3-person team of Veth Coalition soldiers and 2 of Kalas's resupply crew had been positioned. The resupply crew, their names I later confirmed, were Technician Yara and someone who went only by Peso on every manifest I checked, had spent the pre-push hours welding access port covers across the secondary approach routes in that corridor, not blocking them completely, narrowing them, enough that Kreth armor couldn't use them in parallel, had to queue. Yara told me afterward that the idea was Peso's. Peso told me it was Yara's. Neither of them seemed bothered by the ambiguity. Column 3, the heaviest one, went for the primary access corridor, the most defensible stretch of the station. Therefore the one the Kreth expected the most resistance in, and therefore the one Kalas had left almost empty. Honestly, almost. She put Mercer there. Mercer, who was very good with his hands. Mercer, who was upset about his tape. What Mercer had, TBH, done in primary access in the 4 hours before the push, I'll describe as best I can. He turned the corridor into a problem. Not a fortification, which not a kill zone. TBH a problem. Environmental, sequential, architectural. A set of conditions that a large armored column moving in formation would encounter one after another in a way that precluded momentum. A stuck hatch here. A pressure-released smoke compound there. Something involving the lighting grid that I cannot fully explain, and Mercer explained too quickly for me to follow, with his hands moving faster than his mouth. The Kreth column in primary access slowed, then stalled. For what it's worth, not from casualties. From confusion. From a set of circumstances that kept being slightly worse than the last set, every 30 meters for 200 meters. While they were stalled, Kalas moved. Plus, I saw part of what happened in Junction 4 because I was in it, as noted, not observing. The Kreth unit that came through was 8 strong, advance element, moving in the tight breach formation they'd been using all siege. They were disciplined. To be fair, plus fast. The first to be fair, 2 were through the junction threshold before our line had finished responding. What I remember, in fragments, not in the clean, sequential structure I prefer. Kalas moving in a direction that didn't make immediate tactical sense to me, angling away from cover into the path of the advance element rather than perpendicular to it. The sound of something I'd later identify as a repurposed pressure valve, rigged to the junction's climate system, discharging. White. Everything was white for about 3 seconds. Not smoke, some kind of aerosolized coolant compound, which Kalas had apparently known was in the climate system because she had read the station's maintenance logs at some point. I don't know when she slept. I don't know if she slept. And in those 3 seconds, the Kreth advance element lost visual and formation simultaneously. When the white cleared, the element was in 4 pieces. Not because of casualties, 2 were down, the other 6 were intact, but because they'd moved individually in the white, and individually in a junction with 3 branching corridors was the wrong shape to be in. Kalas was already talking, and into her comm. Her voice, the same register it always was, that particular flatness that I had initially read as effect, had since sort of come to understand was simply her operational mode, a voice that didn't have a panic setting. Mercer, primary column is stalled at junction 6. Push them towards 7. They're not going to like junction 7. No, beautiful. She said beautiful the same way she said everything else, which was to say, like it was just the accurate word for the thing, and he heard it that way, and didn't need it to be anything more than that. I want to stop here and describe something that happened at approximately 10:40, because it's the thing I keep returning to in idle moments, and I have had enough idle moments since the siege to have returned to it many times. A Veth soldier named Terrace, my subordinate, 12 years in coalition service, a competent and steady presence in a defensive line, was injured in the cargo transfer B engagement. Not critically. A strike to the left arm, structural damage to the limb, treatable once we had medical resources, which we currently didn't have enough of. Terrace was out of the fight. He was sort of also when I found him sitting with his back against a cargo crate while a human named Corporal Dasha tied a pressure wrap around his arm with one hand while using the other hand to hold a position in the approach route that Terrace had just vacated. She was doing this without being asked. She had assessed the gap in the line, moved into it, and was simultaneously closing Terrace's wound and occupying his firing position. Having apparently decided pretty much these were both her responsibility, Terrace was explaining something to her. In Veth, which she didn't speak. She was nodding in the particular way humans nod when they've no idea what's being said, but want to communicate that the speaker's distress has been acknowledged. I don't know why this is the thing that lodged. The relay, the pipe, the coolant valve, the look, corridor of problems Mercer built in primary access. These are basically the things that changed the battle, and they're the things I should probably be documenting with more rigor. But what I keep returning to is Dasha with her one free hand, nodding at Terrace like whatever he was saying mattered, like she had time for it, like this particular corridor in this particular moment was somewhere worth paying attention to. There was a phrase Kalas used at some point during the morning. I didn't note the exact timestamp, which is unlike me, which I think says something about the state I was in, when I asked her how she kept her people oriented during overlapping engagements. She said, "We talk to each other." I said, "All commanders maintain communication with their units." She looked at me with an expression I was starting to recognize, the one that meant I had said something technically true in a way that entirely missed the point. "No," she said. "I mean, we talk to each other." Dasha knows Mercer's sister's name. Mercer knows that Peso's from a station over the 4 transit ring, and that he gets weird about it when people assume he's from a Corps. We talk to each other. That's not communications management, which that's a brief search, the only time I saw her look for a word. That's why they're still moving. Still moving. Timestamp. 11:15, which the Kreth push had been running for 2 hours. It had not resolved the way a push is supposed to resolve. Kreth tactical doctrine, as I understand it, operates on the principle of mass conversion. Sufficient force applied to a sufficient number of simultaneous points collapses a defensive structure by pure arithmetic. You don't have to be clever. You have to be heavy and coordinated and relentless. And the Kreth are all 3 of those things on any day of the week. The problem, and I use the word the way Kalas used it, meaning a specific condition rather than a complaint, was that our defensive structure had stopped behaving like a structure. It had become, over the course of the morning, something more like a conversation. A station-wide, multi-party, ongoing exchange between people who knew each other's sisters' names and who had collectively read the maintenance logs. Kreth Armor doesn't know what to do with a conversation. Their column in primary access was still stalled. Not retreating. Kreth don't retreat tactically. They redistribute, which is a meaningful distinction. Stationary, caught in Mercer's problem, unable to move forward without resolving the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the thing after that. Column 2 in Cargo Transfer B had pushed through to the secondary staging area, which appeared to be a success until they discovered that the secondary staging area was where Kalas had prepositioned the bulk of our remaining munitions, carefully configured to be detonated by a signal from a modified maintenance console, which Yara was sitting at. I want to be clear, she didn't detonate it. She held the signal. She just made sure the column scouts found a console and found Yara and understood what she was doing. And then she sat there and finger on the trigger. Pretty much not threatening, not negotiating, plus just present, making the math clear. The Kreth column, in my opinion, stopped advancing into the secondary staging area. It didn't retreat, it stopped. And a well-stopped column is a column that's not doing anything, which meant 2 of the 3 push columns were by 11:15 neutralized. Not destroyed, which neutralized. The way you neutralize a chess piece, by making every square it could move to worse than staying put. Column 1, Junction 4, was the only remaining active push, and it was by 11:15 smaller than it had been at 9:11. What finished it happened at 11:43, and it was so straightforward coming after everything else that I almost didn't mark it. Kalas had spent 2 hours peeling away at the Junction 4 column in the way water goes after stone, not through force. Through repeated contact with the right kind of pressure at the right kind of angle. Every time they consolidated, she moved. Every time they honestly pushed forward, something made the forward less certain than the back. A Kreth unit in that condition, reduced, locally coordinated, but cut off in the other 2 columns, operating in a station where every corridor had turned into a specific kind of trouble, eventually hits a point where the cost calculation changes. That moment happened at 11:41, when the Junction 4 column made contact with its nearest other column and found out that column was sitting in a corridor doing nothing. 2 minutes. 2 minutes of whatever communication looked like between Kreth column commanders who had been fighting an incomprehensible station defense for the better part of 3 hours and had arrived at an assessment of the situation. At 11:43, the push stopped. Honestly, plus, not a retreat. Not a cessation. A pause, the specific kind of pause that means someone is re-evaluating the fundamental assumptions of their current approach. The station was quiet in a way it hadn't been since before Cycle 1. Kalas found me at 12:30 in the break room. I had gone there with no clear purpose. There was nothing basically left in it. The rations were gone, the coffee was gone. Harmon had already mourned the coffee. A TBH was the closest thing the station had to a room where nothing was happening, and I needed to be in a room where nothing was happening. She sat down across from me without asking. She smelled like the coolant compound from the Junction. TBH, probably so did I. They're going to come back, she said, not today. They'll regroup, resupply, recoordinate, which a week. Maybe 10 days. Yes. You should request reinforcement through the transit corridor while the push is paused. Window won't stay open. Yes. Oh, I stopped. How are your people? She did the thing where she looked at me like I'd said something accurate in a way she hadn't expected. Tired, which Dasha's running low on pressure wrap. Mercer is annoyed about the tape. A pause. Peso's arm it's a problem. We need a med evac in that window. I'll request it. Good. Another pause. Outside in the corridor, somewhere distant, I could hear someone laughing. One of hers. I couldn't tell which one. Couldn't tell what was funny. Possibly nothing was specifically funny, and it was just that particular inappropriate laugh, the deep, genuine kind, finding its way out after a morning that had wrung everything else out first. I had been awake since Cycle 2. I thought about the 8-year-old architectural note, plus the Herenthi conduit layout, stored for 8 years in the particular way she stored things, not filed, not categorized, just known, waiting to be useful, waiting to be the right piece of a different problem. I thought about what she'd said, different problem, same solution. Sergeant. Sir. How do you know? I stop again. TBH. Started differently. The things you retain. For what it's worth, the Herenthi layout. You know, the maintenance logs. Plus, basically, knowing which climate system has coolant in it. She waited. How do you decide what to keep? A long pause. Longer than usual. Plus, I had the impression this was a question she hadn't been asked, or possibly a question she'd asked herself at some point, and not fully resolved. I don't, she said. I just don't throw things away. She stood up, picked up sort of the nutrition pack she put on the table between us, and handed it to me. I hadn't noticed she'd been holding it. Plus, eat something, she said. We've got a week. She walked out. I sat with the nutrition pack in my hands, and the distant laughter still moving through the corridor, and the display on my comm showing 61 personnel active and 22 humans listed under an attachment classification that some administrator would eventually flag as irregular. Timestamp: 12 hours, 50 minutes, and 3 seconds. I started drafting the reinforcement request. I started it 3 times. The first 2 drafts began with the tactical situation, the siege parameters, the defensive asset inventory. Standard. The 3rd draft, the one I sent, started differently. Started, we have humans on station. Send more. Plus, I've been told since then that this was not a proper military communication format. I've also been told it worked faster than any reinforcement request submitted from this sector in the last 4 years. I don't know what that means exactly. I'm starting to think it means something.